Welcome to Unit 9 on voice and wording. So the first question to start off today is, how many words have you used today that you've recently learned? Words like adhere, aloof, ambiguous, antidote, arcane, assert, attribute. These atypical words provide specific meaning to our messages. So I would highly encourage you to keep your own digital word wall, much like we recommend to elementary and middle grade learners in our own classrooms, but to do it yourself in your Dropbox or Google Drive folder and reference that regularly, especially to spice up your own writing. So our agenda for today looks at readings, talking about voice and word choice, and how to select the perfect word for your particular task. If we reference back to the Mohan article, we can see how Hyland in particular looked at 240 research articles and found that academic writing always has voice to it. So even though people have told you before, leave out your voice, I think that's sort of a thing of the past because it's impossible to fully leave out that voice. So you might as well establish your own and sort of write to those principles that you established over time and for those particular tasks. So also, we have to think about disciplinary voice, right? It's both individual and communal. So as an academic researcher, you start to write like your peers. So it's not just your own voice, but it's often heavily affected by the others with whom you read. And secondly, do you find yourself doing the same, like speaking like your colleagues or the teachers with whom you work or even your friends and family? These are things that you often find and you engage in similar discourse in your own communication. So now it's your turn to be a detective. Let's play a game. So if we think about this question of why do cans of Diet Coke float, but cans of regular Coca-Cola sink? So we have to think like a scientist and use our literary and our scientific skills to try to get at the bottom of why you sort of agree with that notion, or maybe you challenge it. So the argumentative stance goes through a four-step process of making a claim, which is taking a stand. Which side are you going? Do you believe that's true? Do you not? Providing evidence for that, supporting it with research, theory, facts, etc. Even having a counterclaim, right? The opposing view of how other people feel and sort of voice their opinions on that matter before you eventually give a rebuttal in terms of how you talk about your opinion is sort of the right way. So if we think about that, it really goes back to the idea that Coke has more mass, that is 39 grams of sugar that it contains in that bottle, as opposed to the Diet Coke can that has 125 milligrams. And that small difference allows the can of Coca-Cola to sink, whereas the can of Diet Coke will actually float. So most kids can relate to this, meaning they drink soda, they're familiar with it, and you're sort of positioning them to take a little bit of prior knowledge and to stretch that through experiential learning. So is this necessary, particularly when teaching vocabulary? Why do we teach explicit vocabulary like mass and density and grams, temperature, etc.? And then why do we follow up with providing model text to establish voice within writing? And I think the answers lie within the linkages between vocabulary and comprehension. We know that the greater vocabulary knowledge we have, the more able we are to comprehend widely within many different types of texts that we read. And secondly, the connection that you make between what you read and what you write is just as evident. So sometimes we talk about counterexamples, and the one that we're going to look at today is on bad pedagogy. So teachers are quick to say, go look it up in the dictionary or use your context clues, but they fail to teach students how to actually accomplish these things and do them well. So instead of saying those things, they could come up with more salient strategies to facilitate vocabulary acquisition. So let's take a look at this passage here and see if you could just figure out what they're talking about based on going look it up in the dictionary or using your context clues. And so the passage reads, the transurgence between the edges of the discipline and the place of exchange between the nomadic and the settled city can represent a first step. In this space of encounter, walking is useful for architecture as a cognitive and design tool, as a means of recognizing a geography and the chaos of the peripheries, and a means through which to invent new ways to intervene in public metropolitan spaces, to investigate them and make them visible. Talk about a mouthful. But I don't think that we really can understand these ideas because it's removed from the context. And when we think about vocabulary words and teaching them out of context, it really takes a lot of the meaning away from learning the words themselves. And so instead of having kids write words 5 times each and use them in a random sentence, there need to be more meaningful ways to engage in vocabulary acquisition. There are other issues that come up, such as the processes that are inherent to particular discipline learning. So if we think about mathematics, for example, oftentimes we read for understanding, we try to clarify vocabulary or technical jargon, and we try to comprehend the context in which it's written. So if we look at some problem-solving strategies on the following slides, I want to see what kinds of issues come up to you when you're trying to do these mathematical problem sets. The first is going back to trigonometry, for example, where it says, what is the sine, cosine, and tangent of 35 degrees? So using this triangle where the lengths are provided for you, can you figure out this unknown angle? And these things are really challenging if you don't understand the vocabulary words that are, an integral part and the focal point of actually this mathematical problem. So if we think about vocabulary knowledge as critical, this is a perfect case in point. Now, sometimes people teach sort of catchphrases like SOHCAHTOA. So it says it works like the so is the opposite over hypotenuse, the ka is the adjacent over hypotenuse, and the toa is the opposite over adjacent. Or moving forward, it means that the sine of 35 degrees is 0.57, or the cosine is 0.82, or the tangent is 0.7. And so a person cannot do this mathematical problem at all, can't even start on it, unless they have vocabulary knowledge of these three terms. Further, all strategies have pros and cons, so let's examine a few others to see how applicable they are within both the ELA classroom and the disciplines. The first is looking at experiential learning activities to promote vocabulary acquisition. So referencing back to the experiment with the can of Coke and the can of Diet Coke, that's sort of doing an experiment to learn other sorts of vocabulary words, like what is the meaning of mass and what is the meaning of a gram and how much does that actually sort of weigh the can down and so on. And so experiential learning really engages students in critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making in those contexts that are relevant to that content learning. However, they do take more time. And so that's one of the limitations of this particular approach, is you want to use it sometimes, but not for everything. And this approach to learning also involves making opportunities for debriefing and consolidation of ideas within groups. And so students are able to learn with and from one another. Strategy number 2 is a common one you see at all grade levels, where teachers explicitly select, let's say, 5 or 10 vocabulary words to teach in a particular week or unit of study. And of course, research sort of goes back and forth, because we know that 95% of words are learned, 95% or more rather, are learned indirectly. So when we think about which words do we select for explicit instruction, we know that it's critical to really have a rhyme and a reason, a scope and sequence, and a strategy for doing this. So do you want to really just select the ones that are relevant to that unit? And I think the answer really lies in having that transferability. So the Greek and Latin word parts, for example, is a great place to start to ensure that these words are transferable across disciplines. The third strategy that we're going to look at is expecting disciplinary teachers to develop students' writing proficiencies. This is something that is expected, as illustrated through standards of having ELA in terms of language literacy, the language arts across all subject areas, but disciplinary teachers aren't always fully knowledgeable about how to do that. And as literacy teachers in K-12 environments, we need to take it upon ourselves to be literacy leaders in our schools, to be able to foster these other proficiencies within content area teachers. I've put together this pocket guide for teaching vocabulary as well, that's broken down into explicit instruction and techniques for selecting words to use in that way. Also, other techniques to promote word consciousness, still others to look at what are particular word learning strategies, or even instances of how to employ oral language and wide reading, as well as how to integrate vocabulary instruction both before, during, and after reading. And so I would encourage you to look at this handout that I have also included within the portal for this particular unit. And I'll just go over a few of those from the explicit instruction category, where we talk about words should not already be defined in the context of a story. So if it's already defined in the story for you, why would you just do double time and try to teach that explicitly yourself? The book already took care of that. And then another one is that the word, as I said before, is likely to be seen again. It has that transferability or that usage outside of that one situation in which it's initially learned. And to review today's lecture, again, we want to be methodical in the selection of the words that we explicitly teach. We want many more word meanings learned indirectly, as I said. More than 95 to 97% of all words are done that through experiences, engaging in wide reading, as well as communicating with peers and teachers and parents. Our third review point is that it's not limited to being taught or assessed in just the ELA, language and literacy classroom, but that it's critical to success across the disciplines, and that each and every one of us needs to model word consciousness or engage in trying to figure out the meanings of unknown words every chance we get. And again, you can facilitate that more so with your digital word wall that you can house in an electronic file folder, and really share your enthusiasm for learning new words so that students catch on with that mentality